right. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for taking some time out of your evening tonight to join us. My name is Joe Matessa. I am the owner of Brain Tune Columbus, and I'm here with Dr. Paige Gutile of Goza Wellness. And we're here to talk about resetting your perimenopause brain. So before we move forward, a few housekeeping items. We are going to be recording tonight's webinar. So tomorrow you will get a copy of the recording that you can share with friends and family or refer back to if you'd like. So in doing so, we would ask that all questions that you have throughout the presentation, if you could just shoot those over to us in the chat. And at the end of the presentation, we'll stop the recording and go ahead and do a question and answer to maintain everyone's anonymity. And so with that, let's go ahead and get started.
Awesome.
So I'll tell you a little bit about Brain Tune Columbus. So we do cutting edge brain performance therapies, and we really support healing from the inside out, starting with the central nervous system. We utilize two different technologies. One is ISIS microcurrent neurofeedback, which you'll hear me refer to as MCN, and the other one is brain gauge technology. Both of those technologies are independent of one another. They can be utilized independent, or what we see the most effective results with is when we utilize them together. Both technologies are safe, they're non-invasive, and they're completely drug-free. And at the conclusion of Dr. Paige's presentation, we'll circle back and tell you a little bit more about microcurrent neurofeedback and our processes. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Paige.
Thank you. And just a little bit about me, if I haven't met you, my name is Dr. Paige Gutile. I'm the owner of Goza Wellness, like was mentioned. We are a membership-based practice in Hilliard, Ohio, serving women in the perimenopause, menopause age groups. Optimize your hormonal health and metabolic health, which, as you may be experiencing, can really kind of take on a life of its own as we get into our 30s and 40s. And so we are here to really kind of fight some of the narrative that you hear out and about because we really believe that you can feel happier, healthier, stronger, and more energetic as you age. So that's what we're here for. So perimenopause is a topic near and dear to my heart for personal and professional reasons. And so I just wanted to start with kind of centering around how you've been feeling. Maybe this applies to you recently. Maybe it's been going on for a while. Maybe you're talking about it with your friends. I was just chatting with a colleague of mine earlier, and she's like, every time I get together with my girlfriends, it's all we're talking about is perimenopause and peptides and what are we doing? And so I'm here really to just gather us together, one, because it's so important that we realize that you are not alone. If you've ever said, I just don't feel like myself, this is the place for you. We know that it can come off different symptoms and different at different times, and you see some of them there that we'll talk more about. But we are definitely all in this together. You may have been skating along fine and feel like all of a sudden, holy, you know what is going on with my brain? And so I wanted to start really by kind of walking back and briefly walk us through the hormonal phases of life, right? So that we can understand how perimenopause kind of hits us. And so we start off here with good old childhood, right? Childhood is smooth. Our hormones are communicating. Our brain is communicating to every system in our body, but everything's fairly smooth sailing. For a lot of women, they're like, hey, that's the last time I remember feeling like smooth, right? And then along comes good old puberty. If anyone remembers their puberty years or is fortunate enough to be close to someone who is experiencing the puberty years, you well know that puberty can feel like chaos, right? But somehow during this stage of chaos, we know that it's expected, right? We know that there are body changes, mood changes, brain changes, and those hormones are affecting every system in our young sons and daughters' bodies. But nobody feels guilty around that. Nobody feels shame around that. And so I want us to kind of remember that. And then we get into what sometimes we call the reproductive years, the fertile years. And even though the chaos comes, that inset at the bottom represents hormonal changes of estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone that happen during 1 month's time. So that in and of itself can feel like a little bit of chaos, but many of us recognize that as a very predictable chaos, right? And it is interesting that we call those the reproductive years in medicine because if you haven't noticed, the healthcare system and physicians, clinicians, inside the healthcare system, research institutions are really focused on our reproduction, right? I would venture to say that the healthcare system is fairly obsessed with either helping us not get pregnant, helping us get pregnant, or stay pregnant successfully. And God bless it, right? Like, I'm happy, I'm thankful for that. But it's so important that we realize hello, our hormones are not geofenced to our pelvis, right? We are more than reproductive beings. And, I often think about the fact that I used to work in an OB-GYN's office, and it was my first big girl job in undergrad. I was at the front desk, like front line, right? And when I tell you the fast pass VIP treatment that our obstetric patients received was like unparalleled, right? And again, thank goodness. But have you ever tried to get an appointment with your gynecologist lately as a for a well woman visit, especially in your 40s and 50s? It's like, we'll see you in 6 months. And then when you finally do get in the office, it's like, do they even understand what's going on, right? And they don't really understand oftentimes what's going on in these perimenopausal years. And that's what we'll lean into a lot today is perimenopause. And then, of course, perimenopause we often call second puberty for good reason. Like I mentioned in puberty, it can feel very chaotic. But this second puberty often comes with some of the same changes when you think about it. Have you guys seen online people referring to perimenopause as like cougar puberty? That's a good one. Um, but it comes with some of the same changes, mood changes, body changes, not really recognizing, yourself as your own identity changes. But what's different that with perimenopause than puberty is a lot of times it comes with just such an added stress of sometimes shame, sometimes feeling like, oh my goodness, it shouldn't be this way. What am I doing wrong? And so we'll dive into a lot of that. But I wanted to, in this overview, kind of paint the full picture. And the only one I've left off is good old menopause. And it's interesting when you get into this hormone space. Um, Menopause it has challenges, but menopause can often feel like a break. In menopause, our hormone levels have all shifted down, progesterone, estrogen, and testosterone, but at least they're steady, right? at least we're not having that chaos. And so I mentioned that the healthcare system is often just so focused on our reproductive years. And a lot of times when we show up in the gynecologist's office or a PCP's office, it can feel like, do they even know what's going on? I'm getting told that this is normal for aging, that my labs are okay, and that, this is just something that we deal with. And unfortunately, even though perimenopause is more of a conversation these days, I hear that every day from women that I work with. But I also have to introduce you to the person that gaslit me the most in my early perimenopausal years, and it's me, myself, and I. Like, it's me. I'm the problem. It's me. I literally thought, oh, it's just stress. I was going through a divorce. I had two young kids. I was just starting my business. I was grieving the death of my father. And so, of course, I'm going to be more tired. I'm going to have trouble sleeping or be popping awake at night. I'm going to be more irritable. I'm going to not recognize my body as its own. I'm going to, put on those 5 pounds in no time flat, it seemed. And I, even being a physician, even at that time, being focused on hormones, I tried to attribute it to everything else. And around that time as well, I started delving more and more into science updates. And I started seeing more and more women in my practice who were telling me the same things, right? We were all going through the same things. And for a hot minute, honestly, I thought, my Lord, did I catch perimenopause from these women? I thought maybe this is contagious, right? No, perimenopause is not contagious. But I say all of this just to say if you feel like you have been telling yourself some of that same narrative of it must be this, it must be that, what's going on? Oh, I just need to do better. I need to have better nutrition. I need to stop scrolling before bedtime. I need to get out and do more walks. My Lord, I need to like eat more protein. That's all we hear about these days, right? If you've been tempted to repeat that narrative to yourself, I would try to see it for what I consider it. Like, not only is the healthcare system guilty of gaslighting us, we are guilty of gaslighting ourselves. So, when you start to think, like, okay, is this such a big deal? Like, is perimenopause having a moment? I truly believe it is. But it's not a trend, it's not a fad. It truly is a movement of women being heard and understood, research catching up with what our lived experience is. And we are not there yet, but thank goodness things are advancing, right? So, just to kind of level set a little bit, perimenopause, what the heck is it? I mentioned it a little bit before, but it is that transition before menopause. It begins typically 4 to 10 years before menopause. And if the average age of menopause is 52-ish, but yet it's completely normal to go through menopause at age 45 or older, then when you do the math, it's very possible that the hormonal changes associated with perimenopause start in our mid to late 30s and certainly into our 40s, right? And so at this time, the ovaries are still working, but hormones are fluctuating. It's not that hormone deficiency state quite yet, but we're getting there, right? And so when we start to think about like, okay, how do I make sense of all of this? How these hormones are affecting my body? I call it the perimenopause family chaos. And so I think of it this way. Your brain is your mama bear. Your brain is in charge of everything to a certain degree, right? For a long time, as I described in childhood and puberty and reproductive years, the brain is signaling to the ovaries very consistently. Yes, there's some fluctuations, but they know their rhythm. They know what happens every month. Yes, those reproductive years, we can run into some glitches that are under recognized, but like I mentioned before, a lot of times it feels very familiar. And so mama bear is signaling to the ovaries. There comes a time where our ovaries, I tend to think of them as maybe the teenagers, right? The teenagers are getting ready to leave the nest. Maybe they're not listening quite as intently as they used to their mama bear. And of course, I have a teenager at home. I don't want to play into that teenage narrative. She is lovely. You know, we know our teenagers are doing the best they can, but they are learning to be more independent, right? They're not going to listen to us as much and just follow their marching orders. And so when that disconnection between brain signaling and ovary response gets inconsistent, your entire body picks up on that as a stressful physiologic state. And there's no one that picks up on it bigger than mama bear, the brain. So we have mama bear, we have the teenager. Well, what else is going on? Why do we have all these symptoms that are associated with perimenopause? Well, everything's connected, right? And so when your body as a whole picks up on that stressful physiologic state, the first person to alert itself and try to compensate is that adrenal glands. Now, I don't think I represent perhaps the classic middle child phenomena or stereotype, but some people would call the adrenal glands kind of the middle child. I tend to think of just that family dynamic of like there's always one kiddo that's going to try to pick up the slack, right? Maybe and so with this stressful state, there's the adrenal glands that are going to come in and try to compensate. Now, the kicker is our adrenal glands are our stress glands. And if your adrenal glands have been overtaxed, so to speak, for, I don't know, maybe years, maybe decades before perimenopause hits, we're going to have less resilience in the system overall, right? And so then what happens? We kind of have these other kiddos that maybe don't get enough attention. And so everything's connected directly for one thing, but then also the body only has so many resources, right? So by way of direct connection of hormone actions and just that stressful state, we find that there's more thyroid dysfunction. Our insulin and glucose metabolism our glucose metabolism becomes a little bit erratic and our sensitivity to insulin goes down. Well, what happens when that happens? Where that affects how our body processes energy across the board. And when I say how our body processes energy, that also means how our body stores energy. So we're much more likely to store energy as fat, especially that inflammatory belly fat during perimenopause. We won't go into all the details, but there's direct relationship between our hormones and our gut health. There's direct relationship between our hormones and our immune system. So pretty soon it's easy to see how we can get this crazy long list of perimenopausal symptoms, right? So it's important to note, of course, that these symptoms are in every system of the body. We have sex hormone receptors in every system in our body. But yet, of course, not all of us are going to experience all of these symptoms. And I think sometimes that can make it almost hard to wrap our head around, right? It's like, man, how do I know if this, rash is perimenopause or something else? Well, what we have to consider is that um, when I look at hormonal health, we are always getting big picture first. We're taking a survey of all the symptoms that you're having. And we also do have to rule out, we have to look into other causes. So if you've ever been tempted to think like, oh my gosh, they just want to throw everything, say everything's perimenopause these days. Well, it's because it could be, right? Because these hormones, our sex hormones, influence all of our body systems. And when we have irregular signaling from those sex hormones, it just decreases that amount of resilience or that amount of efficiency and coordination. And so sometimes we don't know. It's hard to predict kind of what symptoms are going to pop up to the top. So, um, I always encourage women like, gosh, it's not on you to try to figure things out. And that's a hard place these days when it comes to being a woman in perimenopause, because it can often feel like your physician, isn't helping you connect the dots. Okay, let's focus in on the brain. It's, obviously a main topic of this presentation, and that is because the brain is truly what picks up on the stress of perimenopause first. Also, the brain, our hormone receptors, you know, um, progesterone, testosterone, estrogen are extremely neuroactive. And so these are some examples of why brain symptoms are so key in perimenopause and why we're alerted to those early on in perimenopause. Estrogen receptors are just huge in the brain, right? We think of estrogen as being a girl hormone. We think of it as affecting, breasts and pelvis mostly, but that's such an oversimplification of our female physiology. Our sleep centers, especially, are highly hormonally sensitive. Um, I mentioned before that just by nature of the fact that perimenopause is a physiologic stress on the body, other physiologic stresses, getting sick, travel, having surgery, there's so many physiologic stresses that the body's picking up on. This hormonal stress, even though it's predicted, everybody's going to go through perimenopause, is interpreted by the brain as that physiologic stress. And the brain's tolerance to deal with that stress can definitely vary. And then, of course, one thing that is near and dear to my heart because I talk to so many women who are so frustrated with the mood symptoms associated with perimenopause is that those circuits of emotional regulation, nervous system regulation, naturally are going to destabilize during this time. Doesn't mean it's gonna, we're gonna notice that clinically all the time, but there's always a physiologic effect. Okay, so I wanted to just kind of give a little high level of like what's doing what, right? Because we went through a list of all those symptoms, and it can be hard to kind of say, like, okay, well, how do I make sense of that, right? And so the way I think of it, testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone, if we know one thing about our female hormones, they are very cooperative, right? They love working together. They're very collaborative. And so that's why I represented it here in this Venn diagram. All of our body systems, estrogen, testosterone, and progesterone, they're collaborating in a lot of functions in at the middle of that Venn diagram. But at the same time, each hormone kind of takes the lead or has more influence in certain systems. And so when I talk about what hormone does what, it's a little bit of an oversimplification, quite honestly. But I think it helps us kind of simplify and helps us get our footing sometimes on what symptoms might be influenced the most by certain hormones. So we'll start out talking about progesterone. Progesterone is a very neuroactive hormone, and progesterone is very, very calming. It has a direct connection to GABA, which you may have heard of. It's a neurotransmitter that's very calming. Progesterone is very involved in promoting sleep depth, easy for me to say, our deep, restful sleep. So if our progesterone level is dropping, which it does early in perimenopause, that is why sleep can all of a sudden become a problem. That's one of the reasons. Progesterone is also just extremely helpful as a calming agent, as a relaxation agent to help us not be as reactive to stressors. I was talking to someone the other day and they went on progesterone as a supplement, and they're just like, it's like my fuse just totally lengthened back out where I'm accustomed to it being. And that's what a lot of women experience on with progesterone. Progesterone is the hormone that goes down first in perimenopause. So a lot of those progesterone related symptoms that I just mentioned, you will start noticing as the first symptoms, maybe in 30s or early 40s. Estrogen does a lot. Again, we all collaborate. And of course, it's known for a lot of different things, um, bone health, cardiovascular health, vaginal, genital urinary tract health, but specifically related to the brain, it is extremely collaborative when it comes to serotonin and dopamine signaling. So, serotonin, I call it the like everything's okay chemical. And so when estrogen is being erratic, naturally we get the signal like, wait a minute, everything is suddenly not okay. Dopamine, gives us that quick hit, right? It gives us that sense of reward, and it gives us motivation, helps us see what's going to be worth it. And so a lot of women in perimenopause find, gosh, I'm struggling in those areas. I just don't feel as motivated as I used to. In addition, estrogen affects just so much in our brain. It's involved in glucose metabolism. And so we'll talk about that famous brain fog that we sometimes feel in perimenopause. Supports synaptic plasticity, which is a really fancy term, right? But you may have heard about the fact that we want our neurons and the synapses where neurons communicate with each other, we want them to be learning and relaxed. We don't want them to be stuck in their ways, right? Um, Estrogen can go down at different points in perimenopause, but before it ever goes down, absolutely, it goes up and down, right? Those fluctuations become very erratic. Testosterone. Testosterone is, in some ways, the forgotten female hormone. We sometimes hear about estrogen as the pink hormone and testosterone's the blue hormone. We all have both. And testosterone is so key in motivation, drive, brightness of mood. It's very much a brain hormone. Um, it's definitely involved in libido, which, when you think about it, our desire for sexual activity is a mood, right? That is a feeling that comes from the brain, a desire that comes from the brain. Testosterone influences confidence and executive function. And so a lot of women come to me and they're like, look, I present, I speak on stages, and I feel like I'm losing it. Like I just don't have it anymore. Or where did I put my keys, right? Or I can't find my words. That word finding difficulty and brain fog is involved with testosterone too. Um, a lot of women come to me and say, you know what? I think I have ADD. I really never had those feelings before, but I just don't feel like I can have that focus and have that maintenance of completing tasks that I used to. So let's go through just kind of symptom by symptom real quick and talk about some of the most common brain symptoms that you'll notice related to perimenopause. Brain fog, I think I never really heard the term brain fog until, I don't know, maybe it was after COVID that we used that terminology a little bit more. It's almost hard to define, but everybody kind of knows what it is, right? I just can't find my words, can't think straight, don't feel like I'm firing on all cylinders. And while we may be tempted to think of brain issues, emotions, functioning as like, hey, I should just be able to do this better. I think it's so important to remember the biology behind it, right? And so the brain is very sensitive to fluctuations in glucose. That's often related to brain fog. How well is your body utilizing glucose as energy, as fuel? It changes the efficiency of those neurons connecting. So when you feel like, oh, I'm not firing on all cylinders, literally our synapses are not firing on all cylinders. And of course, a lot of times I use the visual of a Venn diagram, and I think I relate to it a lot because we can't look at our health in silos, right? Everything collaborates. And so sleep fragmentation that comes during perimenopause only amplifies the brain fog that we can experience. Reactivity, right? I talk to women that are just so frustrated and come to me with a lot of shame or a lot of guilt that it's like, oh my gosh, I'm snapping at my kids and I don't mean to. I have to go apologize. And oh my gosh, if my husband breathes that way one more time, he's out of here, right? And again, it's easy for us to think, oh, I just need to do better. And yes, self-reflection is important, but it's also important to connect it to the biology behind this. So we have less GABA. We have fluctuations in our serotonin levels, which tell us that everything's okay. We have increased stress sensitivity, and we just have that decreased emotional buffer to be able to handle things when our hormones are fluctuating. Sleep makes the world go round, right? We sometimes think of, sleep as our healing time, our restoration time. It is also such an active time. It's a hormone balancing time. It's a cleanup time to clean up all the inflammation and stressors of the day. And so progesterone, estrogen, and testosterone, honestly, are involved in sleep regulation. And so, what do we do about this? I wanted to give an overview of kind of like nuts and bolts. What are we dealing with here? Because I think it's so important to know what's going on in our bodies, so that we can understand it and partner with our bodies and not feel like we're fighting against our bodies. But ultimately, it's like, what do we do about it, right? One of the most important things, I think the most important thing about our health during perimenopause is to realize that even though our brain loves to think in black and white, loves to think in A plus B equals C, our health is not a simple equation. Health is very much a recipe, right? And so my approach is that we have to know all the ingredients. Like we have to look into everything on the table. What are all the symptoms we're having? Really do kind of a self audit on what symptoms are we having, get information, that professional audit, let's get some data, and then ultimately come up with a self care plan as well as a professional care plan that helps move you forward. It can seem overwhelming, right? When we have all of these symptoms going on and we have all of these pillars of health to consider. But the most important thing when you're thinking of, hey, what am I going to do about this? What am I going to do to feel better? Is to develop a plan that your nervous system can accept, right? Like if we're all walking around so stressed, tired, and overwhelmed that and that's contributing to our state, the last thing that's going to improve it is a complicated multi-step project that is hard to implement into our life. That's just going to make things worse. And I know it's frustrating. We all want to feel better tomorrow, right? But we know that walking with our bodies and using techniques that are slow incremental changes is actually what the body responds to more. And so I am a huge fan of really partnering with patients and not only just thinking about, hey, what does the body need, but also what are your goals, right? Like everybody's different. And just as important as your goals, what are your healthcare philosophies? I partner with some patients that are like health by biochemistry, right? Like they want to know all the gadgets and all the tricks. And then we have more natural approaches. And so I love that I've been so fortunate over the years to train in a very traditional medical system, but also in lifestyle medicine, functional medicine, and can incorporate kind of the most natural and the safest, most scientific approaches that are appropriate to you. So, as we kind of walk through this, I don't want this to feel overwhelming, but I would love for you to just quickly reflect and jot down some things, maybe one thing in each category that hey, maybe I'm going to think about doing that. That's something that my body needs. It's something that I have the capacity to handle, and it's something that I want to do, right? Like, yes, it's true that we sometimes have to do things that we don't want to do up front, but are worth it in the long run. But a big part of our health is not torturing ourselves. It's finding joy in life. And so we should be able to make this fun, right? Okay, so let's think about some self-care opportunities when it comes to our mental emotional health. Thought awareness, really, we spend so much time in the go, go, go. Do we even know what we're thinking half the time? No, we do not. I forget the data, maybe Joe, related to like, oh, this percentage of thoughts are subconscious, that we aren't even aware of. There's so much going on in our mind, but taking the time to slow down our thinking and really perform that very meta but advanced human skill that we have of thinking about what we're thinking about, right? And so that allows us to slow down and reframe, right? To say, okay, how can I think about this differently? Certainly, as I believe that we are our own best therapist first, our own best coach first. And so, borrowing some of those techniques, journaling, brain dump, breathing exercises, all of those things can be helpful. And these things are so individualized to you, right? Um, I that last bullet point is an item that is near and dear to my heart because I think it's something that we don't talk enough about. Identity support and transition. We all have identities, right? We may identify as a woman, as a doctor, as a mom, as a sister, as, fill in the blank, right? And our transition during perimenopause can feel overwhelming because we feel that shifting. And it brings into a lot of deeper questions like, what kind of woman do I want to be as I age? And one of the things I love about the work that we do is like, we don't shy away from any of that. We have those conversations about not only the fancy hormone stuff, but like the deeper mindset work. This oftentimes tag teams with true nervous system regulation techniques, prayer, meditation, yoga, breath work, somatic practices, getting out in nature, literally touching grass, right? And looking at, gosh, what am I doing in my day? Can I do it with more ease? Can I do it 10% more slowly? How can I make getting ready in the morning just 10% more ease filled, right? Um, fitness, my goal here was just to kind of like hit some high points. I feel like, sometimes in the fitness category, we can feel like, oh my gosh, I'm doing everything and still my body composition's changing. Or sometimes it's like, oh gosh, I really haven't worked out in years or decades. And I see perimenopause as a fork in the road, and I really need to embrace that as I age because I know I want to age strong. I don't want, if I fall down, I want to be able to get up. I don't want to have to hit the call button, right? And so it's just so important to reconnect to our fitness and realize how protective it is for our brain on multiple levels. Nutrition. Uh, is anyone else sick of hearing about protein? I know it's so important, though. It's so important, and we don't get enough of it. Protein, healthy fats, fiber through brightly colored fruits and vegetables, whole grains, beans. Because of the chaos of perimenopause and those little bit of clunkiness in our insulin and glucose regulation, the leaning on protein, healthy fats, and fiber to keep glucose steady is so important, not only for our metabolism and body, but for our brain, right? Our brain is super sensitive to glucose fluctuations. And so it's ultra important that we lean into that and away from, all the sugary processed stuff that can be so tempting. I mean, they call it comfort food for a reason, but um, that blood sugar stabilization is just so important. All right. So that was a little bit about our perimenopause self-care plan. Well, what do we do on the professional side of things, right? And again, the key is what is your specific situation? What are your goals? What are your healthcare philosophies? So this is what we see as kind of the breakdown of our comprehensive assessment, really looking at everything underneath the scenes. Um, when it comes to supplementation, my goodness, you can eat a whole meal full of supplements, right? But I believe that foundational supplements are fairly necessary for most. Even doing our best, we're not getting, what we should get from our foods, unfortunately. And then these are supplements that become kind of ultra important during perimenopause. Getting our microminerals, methylated Bs, magnesium, omega-3s, you're hearing a lot about creatine these days, great for muscle preservation and brain energy. Vitamin D3 and adaptogens are kind of our stress regulators. I know I'm moving quick here, but I want to be mindful of time. Um, Hormones are so important during perimenopause. We know that bioidentical hormones, not necessarily birth control pills. If you need birth control pills for birth control, that's one thing. But bioidentical hormones, progesterone early on, estrogen for most women, testosterone for some women. Some women don't need testosterone. Oftentimes we do, especially related to our brain symptoms, can be a game changer related to our brain health as well as our whole health. And being able to be creative and be personalized in how you use the hormones that are best for you is really key during perimenopause. Of course, I may be biased, but the standard PCP, like I was for 13 years in my previous life, we were not trained on hormone health, and we definitely were not trained on how to match hormonal health to the perimenopausal chaos. But what we cannot tolerate is a physician and or other clinician this day and age saying, "Hey, we ride through perimenopause. You need to worry about that later." So that hormone health early on in perimenopause has been shown to have the best outcomes. And of course, we do have other non-hormonal ways to target our brain-related symptoms as well. And so I want to turn it over to Joe. I think his modalities complement what I do oh so well. That's why the first time we met, it was just like chatter, 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 right? And I frequently talk with my patients about physical therapy for your brain because, it's a no-brainer if we're talking about how to optimize our bicep function. We're going to look at modalities outside of hormones. And so a lot of what Joe will talk to you about, I consider physical therapy for your brain.
Thanks, Dr. Page. Much appreciated. Yeah, so how does microcurrent neurofeedback help support the symptoms that are associated with perimenopause? So, MCN helps the brain adapt to the neurological and physiological disruption that's caused by the fluctuating estrogen and progesterone levels. So, while it does not necessarily add hormones to the body like hormone replacement therapy, it does target the brain's regulatory systems to mitigate common symptoms. So let's talk about the physiological connection. So first, there is regulating the HPA axis. The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis is central to hormone regulation. MCN helps to calm the nervous system, which can reduce chronic stress and high cortisol levels. And those can actually exacerbate hormone imbalances. The second thing is promoting neuroplasticity, another fancy word. So, neuroplasticity is the brain's incredible ability to heal itself. So, MCN encourages the brain to build new and more resilient neural pathways. This helps the nervous system remain stable even as hormone levels decline. And thirdly, the autonomic balance. It shifts the body from a state of sympathetic dominance, which is constant stress, into parasympathetic activity, rest and repair, which supports natural hormonal balance and an overall well-being. So let's talk about what you can get relief from. And so the amazing thing about microcurrent neurofeedback is that it supports healing of the whole central nervous system and doesn't just mask symptoms. So its benefits extend across a wide variety of both behavioral and neurologic conditions. Everything from ADHD and PTSD to dementia and Parkinson's. But if we think about those symptoms that are directly related to perimenopause, I laugh as I go back to when we first opened. We have an intake form that we have clients to fill out. And I came to find that in that intake form, we ask a question if you're experiencing any symptoms related to perimenopause and menopause. And it says, if so, please list. And there was a line. And I had one client after another literally laughing, like, you think this one line is actually going to capture all of my symptoms of perimenopause? You need like a whole page. And so as we would be talking about those symptoms of perimenopause, it just aligned so perfectly with what we do here at BrainTune. And so you've heard Dr. Page talk a lot about brain fog. So brain fog and cognitive fatigue. So hormonal declines often cause disruptions in memory and focus. And MCN helps to reorganize dysfunctional brainwave patterns and restore cognitive clarity and essentially lifting that fog that you're experiencing. The second is anxiety and mood swings. So fluctuating hormones impact neurotransmitters and emotional control centers like the amygdala. MCN calms overactive fight or flight responses, reducing irritability and emotional reactivity. So we've been hearing about fight or flight our whole life. And what happens is the brain gets stuck in that fight or flight pattern. And so neurofeedback helps to release us from that fight or flight pattern. Next are both physical fatigue and sleep disturbances. And you heard Dr. Page talk a lot about sleep as well. So many women in perimenopause struggle with insomnia due to the cortisol imbalances or night sweats. MCN encourages the brain to enter deep relaxation states. supporting better sleep quality and natural melatonin production. And lastly are the hot flashes. So by acting on the hypothalamus, the brain's thermostat, neurofeedback can help regulate body temperature and has been shown to reduce the frequency and severity of hot flashes in some studies. So let's talk about our therapies. So ISS microcurrent neurofeedback. Neurofeedback itself falls under the umbrella of biofeedback, and neurofeedback's been around for about 50 years. Microcurrent neurofeedback has been healing brains for about 15 years. And so, as I mentioned with the brain's neuroplasticity, it gently prompts your brain to reset and rebalance itself. And to do so, it uses low-level electrical signals that encourage the brain to release in these stuck patterns, which is much like your computer. And you just, when it gets stuck, you just have to reboot it. And so these electrical signals are equivalent to 3 trillionths of a watt. They are so gentle, so tiny, you don't even know they're happening. And in 15 years, there are no side effects, no adverse reactions to them. The other technology that we use is called brain gauge, and it's from a company called Cortical Metrics. It was developed by a neuroscientist at University of North Carolina, and it's a very simple tool. It looks like a mouse, and it functions in a couple of different ways. Many of us will go through experiencing things and kind of think they're happening, but don't really know. We need to see something tangible. So one of the things Brain Gauge does, it allows us to take cognitive assessments that will assess us on 8 different levels and give us a baseline when we're starting therapy, and then allow us to track progress as we're going through the therapy. And it uses a tool that looks like a computer mouse. You'll see it there on the left picture. And it uses gentle vibrations on your fingertips to assess how well the brain processes information. So it might vibrate in the middle and you have to click it with your pointer finger as quickly as you can to develop speed. Or sometimes it'll be which one is more intense, or which one lasts longer, or which one came first. And so you go through these series of exercises and it really gives you that kind of overall baseline of where you're starting. And then beyond that, it functions as like a gym for your brain. And much like you would do reps or cross training, you can either dive down in reps with one particular category like speed, or you can cross train across multiple categories like speed and accuracy and plasticity. And so when I'm working with clients using the Brain Gauge tool, I'm actually like a personal trainer for their brain. And while we incorporate the Brain Gauge tool into the neurofeedback process here in the office, we also have home units available that you can take home and do it 15, 20 minutes a day, 3 to 5 days a week. And so what are the benefits of combining the two together? As I mentioned earlier, they are both independent technologies, but what we found is that when we put the two together, we get amazing results. And so rebooting and reconnecting the brain, ISS MCN helps to reboot and reset the brain, restoring the natural balance. The Brain Gauge helps to reconnect and strengthen the new neural pathways that are being generated. And then lastly, the building sustaining relief. So the ISS MCN does build sustainability over time. I'll tell you in just a moment about the typical protocol, but the Brain Gauge exercises help to strengthen those bonds in between sessions and allow you to track the progress from start to finish. So what does a typical protocol look like? So we typically start out with a free 2-hour consultation that can also include your first treatment if you'd like. We complete the client intake that I mentioned previously. You do a 20-minute brain gauge assessment. We prioritize your healing journey and what your goals are, and then you can go through an ISIS-MCN treatment if you'd like. After that, there's typically 20 treatments that extend over a 6 to 8 month period. And you'll typically do twice a week for 4 to 6 weeks. And because each session builds upon the last, as you get to the point where you're lasting from one to the next, then we can take you down from twice a week to once a week for about 4 weeks. And then once your relief is extending from one session to the next, we can take you to every other week for a couple of months. And once you're experiencing that relief from one to the next, then we can go to once a month until your 20 sessions are complete. Beyond that, we find that everyone's different. Some people don't need to come back at all. Some people come for a tune-up once a month because they like how it makes them feel and they want to keep a good thing going. Some may come back once a quarter or as needed. It really does vary. Everyone's central nervous system is different. Everyone has different conditions that they're working with. And then, as I mentioned in the last one with Brain Gauge, you can do the home exercises with the Brain Gauge home unit at 15 to 20 minutes a day for 3 to 5 days a week. Go ahead.
Find the unmute button there. So just to remind you, because I think we can't overstate it enough in this chaotic time of life where it's very easy for us to lose our footing. I want to remind you that you are not broken. This is a transition, but also this is physiologic and deserves support. So it's not, even though it's a transition, it's not something that we want to imply like, let's just write it out. You absolutely deserve to feel better. And that approach is best comprehensive. So, what's next? We would love for you to schedule a comprehensive perimenopause brain assessment with GOSA. Happy to serve. We have we partner with patients either in a one-time assessment, a 90-day program, or an ongoing membership. And then, like Joe mentioned, a brain tune evaluation just adds that layered support so that you can address your health in the most comprehensive way. We'll give you a chance to, if we are not friends on IG, to get out your phone, take a snapshot. I would love to connect with you there.
There we go. And here's the Brain Tune team. Christmas McManus, Megan Colombo, and myself. And here's our contact information. As Dr. Page and I started talking about all of this, we really equated this layered, multifaceted approach to navigating this journey as something like if you had to lose 25 pounds, you wouldn't just go on a diet, or you wouldn't just exercise, or you wouldn't just use semaglutides. You'd do all of them. And so we really saw both of our approaches as complementing one another to help you get through these tough times and through this journey and to ease it up for you.